failure is a part of the process. Don't let the fear of failure hold you back, because failure is just an opportunity to start again. And, the first thing, like Maynard said, the first thing you make isn't going to be as good as it's going to be when you're done with it. Whenever I make, PowerPoint or an Excel spreadsheet or fill in the blank, the first draft is usually a little shitty. But you should see my 40th draft. It starts to come together. So yeah, I would just kind of piggyback off what you said and accept failure, embrace failure. It's gonna happen. It's semi-inevitable. To err is human. I forget who said that quote, but don't let the fear of failure hold you back, because it's just the stepping stone on the path.
Hey there, everybody, and welcome back to B2P, the Business and Podcasting Show. My name is Maynard Breslow, and I'm joined here today by Bailey Pace. Bailey is the owner and founder of Palfrey Consulting. Thanks for joining me today, Bailey.
Thanks for having
me. Yeah, pleasure's all mine. Really grateful to have you on. Today we'll be talking about some great stuff. Obviously, entrepreneurship is something that is always changing, and so we'll be talking about the fluid nature of entrepreneurship and how not only is entrepreneurship changing, but we are also having to be changing all the time, keeping the fluid, stay fluid ourselves, and kind of roll with the punches. We'll also be talking about how the way we're raised, right? How that affects our understanding of the world, how we look at the world, and how our approach to business kind of changes as well. And I know you have an amazing story, so excited to hear about that. And also talking about, in terms of that fluid nature of business, entrepreneurship, the move towards digital and virtual completely set up in conjunction with AI, and specifically with the OpenAI's new operator feature and how we can integrate that into our business. So a lot of great stuff to talk about today. I guess, before we get into the meat and potatoes, tell me about yourself, tell me about your background and Palfrey Consulting.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So, as Maynard said, I am the CEO / owner, founder of Palfrey Consulting. That's my little firm. But before that, I was a student a long time ago. And so I think I'm going to kind of get into my background, my history just a little bit so you guys can understand where I'm coming from. I was really blessed because I was homeschooled from a young age. And then I decided to go to high school, like public school, and it really wasn't for me. I didn't feel like I was like learning or being challenged. So I decided to drop out and get my ACT scores and do GED and go that route. So I started attending college at a pretty young age, around the age of 16. And then I graduated at 19, got my master's degree at age 21, and then decided to jump into the workforce. Little did I know COVID-19 was about to happen, but before COVID-19 happened, I was working at a local TV news station. It was really exciting, fun time for me because I was learning a lot and getting to meet a lot of people. And then, like I said, COVID happened and I totally started working remotely, still at the news station. And then it just grew from there. I began kind of branching out and doing other teaching gigs and then doing some virtual assistant gigs. And then I just found, some great people who mentored me and showed me like, if you don't want to go back to work in office, you don't have to. There's other things you can do. So that's really kind of the beginning of my journey into entrepreneurship, because my context that I grew up in was my dad was a mailman and my mom was a teacher and her mom was a teacher. So I was probably going to be a teacher or a mailman, but that's just the context that I had, that I was raised in, that I thought, okay, like, that's what you do. You grow up and you get a job, and, here's kind of like the paths that have been laid out before me that I see people within my circle kind of pursuing. And so that's, when it's all that's kind of your context. Not to pull Kamala Harris, but we are all growing and raised and born within a certain context, and that really shapes our perception and our understanding of the world around us. So it wasn't really until I met other entrepreneurs and learned kind of their journey and their story that I started to realize that there's other options than just traditional employment, like W-2 employment that most of us are familiar with. There are other options. So yeah, that's kind of my little intro about me. Let me know if you have any questions.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's, for me, unique in the sense that I'm sure so many people have come into entrepreneurship and become business owners from that kind of traditional workforce, having that work ethic and kind of coming from a place where maybe stability and showing up and getting a paycheck and making sure that growing from there, right? That this is amazing values in its own right, right? So I guess you mentioned that maybe you had some mentors or you had some people that you saw. What was really that bug? How'd you catch the bug? And how did your parents kind of react to that? Right? Was it like, oh yeah, of course, like whatever you want to do, or is it kind of like, listen, it's great, but don't you want to like just get a normal job, kind of thing?
Absolutely. Yeah, I can totally get into that. So, like I said, I met some people who kind of mentored me and showed me, like, this is possible. You can be an entrepreneur. You just have to kind of file an LLC and you're off to the races. In terms of if my family was supportive, I'm very lucky because my family is super supportive, emotionally always, if not, in other ways. So they were like, "That's great, Bailey. Like we can't wait to see what you do. We believe in you. You've always been a high achiever, so we're not worried about you." But at the same time, like I said, my parents' context was, they're like my mom, who was a teacher, her mom was a teacher. My dad, who was a mailman, his dad was a coal miner, among like many other things. So that was kind of the context that they knew, and doing something different than that, I think, has been very scary for them because there isn't kind of like the security of stability as you would have with a traditional job. I could lose clients tomorrow if this podcast goes poorly and just be totally out of work.
We're trying to make sure that
Um,
doesn't happen. It's all good.
Please, you guys. But, at the same time, they've just always had my back, and they always let me know, like, the worst thing that could possibly happen, other than, like, getting audited by the IRS, is just actually having to go back to, like, W-2 traditional employment. So, if that's the worst that can happen, I'm really excited to see, what's the best that can happen. So it's definitely something I'm still pursuing right now while I am young, but I'll probably continue to do it at least for the next foreseeable future for me right now. But yeah, it's not something that they were like, "Oh, okay, you're just gonna be a CEO now." Like, that's super logical, Bailey. I was like 25 at the time, so not that I'm much older than that now, but yeah, it was a little bit of a shocker. But like I said, I kind of, was a high school dropout and got my master's degree at 21. So I've always kind of taken I guess, like a road less traveled a little bit. But I do want to let everybody at home listening know, if you're not an entrepreneur already, like, and you have a little bit of a taste for it, like you might be an entrepreneur already a little bit, even though you don't think it. Like, just having the ideas of that there's the possibility of something outside of traditional employment, like, you might be an entrepreneur, actually. So my family is super supportive, emotionally. They're like, "Go, Bailey, you can do it. We believe in you." But it's definitely outside of like their comfort zone, I would say.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think that kind of upbringing, how we're all raised, definitely shapes the way that we kind of view the world. Like as I mentioned, I was kind of my dad is an entrepreneur, his whole family, and for some reason, my dad always kind of wanted me to get in, traditional kind of high paying job. Go be a doctor. Go be a doctor. Go. These were the kind of places where my dad was kind of pushing me until like I'm like I was kind of raised in this, and this kind of what I want to do in that kind of sense. But you also mentioned, right, that you kind of took the path, the lesbian path, and I think traditionally, uh, thinking about homeschool and all these kind of things, it wasn't quite as popular as maybe it is now, right? You mentioned that you're a little bit younger,
Right.
and I see that this is much more kind of common, accepted, less. I think it was like, oh, they're homeschooled, and there was like kind of a negative connotation associated with it. But I see more and more parents doing this. I think there's more and more reason kind of to do it a little bit, and so it's not such a thing. How did that kind of shape you as well? Do you feel like that maybe prepared you more for it? In the sense that uh, in a lot of ways, schools they kind of just train you to be a worker bee and to get things done, and maybe this your parents unwittingly kind of trained you in a way, to have a different way of looking at the world. How did that kind of shape you as well on education? And how do you think
Definitely.
that that trend's going to continue in the future?
Yeah, so I will say it was like a different time back then, and it was like in West Virginia and Appalachia. So the context was, the other people, like the other kids I knew that were being homeschooled, like it was kind of because their parents wanted to take them out of school because they didn't like what they were learning in school.
Mhm.
So like they had kind of like religious reasons behind, homeschooling their children. So it was very different. We didn't have a ton of study groups or anything like that where I got to socialize with other children, but there were like some opportunities where, for example, once a week we would go to the YMCA and play with all the other homeschool kids or, take a field trip to a park or a botanical garden, that kind of thing. So there were some opportunities to like socialize with other children, but I would say that was like one of the biggest things that was kind of like a drawback of being homeschooled was just that lack of social interaction. And when I did go to school, that was something that I had to catch up with because everybody kind of already had formed cliques and their friend groups. There wasn't really a ton of like free space for some homeschooled weirdo to kind of like come in and make friends with people. I tried a little bit, but yeah, social skills probably are a little bit lacking there. But it was a very different context at that time because it was kind of before school shootings were as common as they are
Oh,
now.
mhm.
So there wasn't like that element to it. But yeah, I do think it's gonna be more common as kind of like time progresses because of that element. I certainly feel that I wouldn't wanna send my kids to public school because I would be scared that something bad would happen to them there, beyond them learning, I don't know, evolution. I would be worried about something terrible happening to them and them, not coming home. So I do think it's gonna be, kind of a trend moving forward. I hope it's more of a trend to where, like, say I'm a mom who's homeschooling my kids. Maybe I invite like, our little homeschool group of 8 over to my house to study one day. The next day they go over to, Susie homemaker's house and study with her kids and learn that way. I think that would be great to have like more community amongst kids being homeschooled. And I think that is happening to a certain degree because it's been, quite a a few years, a decade or so since I was being homeschooled. So I do hope that that community is kind of being built up, and I'm sure it is, especially with the progression of technology. But yeah, that was one thing that I kind of did miss out on. Like I missed out on like prom and some of those moments. So there is a sacrifice, but when I like look back on it, I got to be best friends with my mom and my brother, like know them so well and learn from them and some of the things I didn't learn probably were things I'm better off not learning in public school, like a lot of different slang terms for different parts of your body and things like that. So,
Or bad habits, or
overall,
yeah, I mean, all kinds of things you're exposed to, which I guess is we're told is like part of growing up, right? But it's like, what do you mean you're not going to college? You mean you're not going to go and drink all the time? Because there's also a movement as well of people to, especially like in entrepreneurship circles, right, where maybe not college isn't the best solution as it was before. It's not what it used to be. There you are, you dropped out, you got your GED, and you went and got a master's that you had by 21, right? And I think there's also kind of this changing view that where it's like, okay, instead of going to college for 4 or 5 years or whatever, and just kind of being that lifestyle and habits, whatever good habits, not so good habits that people develop there, people can enter the workforce and gain that experience and come out kind of in a different position than people who are just getting out of school in that kind of debt or being able to kind of start a business, getting different kinds of experiences I think weren't there before. And I guess as well. So all the stuff is changing all the time, and as we know, entrepreneurship itself is changing, right? So talk to me about that, how that kind of changing nature of entrepreneurship is kind of influence you and the way that you run your business, and kind of having to be adaptable and roll with the punch in that regard.
absolutely. Before I jump into that, I do want to address one thing you said
Yeah,
a second
happily.
ago about like not attending college. I think that is a perfectly viable route, especially if you don't feel like going into tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars in
Yeah.
debt. But I will say if you're going to go that route, you need to be the kind of person who's a little bit driven and like self-motivated because if you're not putting in the same time into whatever it is, entrepreneurship, or maybe you're just like self-learning, like studying on your own, if you're not still putting in like hours every single day, you're not going to be able to get like the same value out of it that you would by going to college. Because college forces you to sit in class for hours. It forces you to study and write papers for hours. So if you don't have a plan of like, okay, first I'm going to teach myself on YouTube, and then I'm going to get this Google certification, and then I'm going to teach myself this. If you don't have like the self-discipline, I guess, to do that, I think college is an amazing option for people. I I would love to go back to college tomorrow and continue learning, but it does seem more and more less attainable or unattainable depending on your financial situation. So definitely a good point there. But now getting into your question about my business, yes, we are totally remote and kind of like the future of entrepreneurialism, like we were talking about. I do think it is headed towards the, remote work environment. I think Spotify is a really good example of that, but there are other large companies who understand that, the overhead cost for renting a space, and there's just so much that goes into it. Not only do you have to rent the space, but you have to buy the office chairs, the computers, you have to fill up the toilet paper in the bathrooms, coffee in the break rooms. When you consider all of that, you start thinking like, oh, wow, actually, it doesn't sound so terrible to have our employees work remotely. That being said, I would say that remote work, and you could probably speak to this as well, Maynard, but remote work isn't for everybody. It does take a certain type of like gumption or just willingness to be locked into a computer screen, regardless of like your surroundings, or, if you have kids at home screaming, you got to kind of like lock in for hours every single day. So it is kind of tough if you don't have like a quiet at home environment, which luckily I do, but that can be like a barrier for people.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think there's a common thread here in everything that we're talking about in terms of whether a person's homeschool or a person chooses not to go to college or working remotely. I think one of the things that you mentioned, right, is having that kind of inner drive, right, having that gumption, as you said. And there is something to be said about social facilitation, right, which is why even if a person's working remotely and you're in like a co-working space, or co-working, there's different kinds of doing that as well, right, where maybe there's different systems with other business owners where they just get on and work on Zoom together, right? And the Zoom's just on, or there's like bookends, check-ins where you're checking in. And one of my buddies actually created a app called Groove, right? Where it's people who are working remotely, and it's like 50-minute sessions where you check in before and say, okay, cool, this session, this is what I'm going to work on. And then you have like, you kind of have your list or whatever, or however you want to organize it. And then uh,
Nice.
gives you like 25-minute warning, 5-minute warning, and then there's like a regroup, at the end, and you kind of like check in with somebody. But there is for sure uh, coming to you from my home office, and which I love, that my wife and my kids are downstairs. I can go downstairs and be dad in between meetings, calls, and work,
The
and
best.
but at the same time, we also run an office, right? We run an office, and the people who are in there are like, man, I don't know how I'm working here because I can't work at home, right? That's the whole point. I need to like be focused in a way, and so there is definitely something to be said. And same thing when we talk about college and everything like that, right? That having that social facilitation where there's just people around in the room, even, right? And you just it does something towards keeping people on track, accountable, responsible, that like you said, we really have to be driven. And this is kind of the blessing, the curse of entrepreneurship, right? That we don't have a boss, so to speak, but we may have many people holding us accountable in terms of clients. And it's not like we don't have responsibility. We have a lot more responsibility, but it's just like we don't necessarily have to come in at a certain time and clock in and out, and everything along those lines. I guess what kind of role does that play in your life as well? In terms of that social facilitation, or how do you kind of keep yourself on track in that remote workspace?
Yeah, I do sometimes miss working in person just because, like, that interpersonal communication and, like, connection. I do miss that. I sometimes miss being able to, like, peek over my cubicle and be like, "Hey, I have a question about this," instead of, like, writing an email or a Slack message or what have you. So I would say like there's definitely pros and cons to both. For me and my business, I would just say like the overhead cost, especially as like a startup, because I am still very young in my business is kind of like lifespan, where I still consider us a startup, kind of like in that first and second year. Um, I couldn't like justify the overhead cost of rent and utilities and office furniture and everything for my firm, just because I really like to keep things, quick and flexible and, you know, work from home. That's my preference. I don't currently have like a ton of, people working for me, employees or anything like that. So if that changed, I might consider, having an in-person workspace, especially if that was their preference to like work in person. But overall, I love working remotely, and it might be because I was homeschooled and like I'm used to like waking up in my pajamas and like clicking through my computer a little bit, and then grabbing a snack and then like logging back on. That's kind of been my life for a long time, so that probably plays into it a little bit. But yeah, it can be hard to get like focused sometimes, or like motivated, especially when you're, the only one here in your workspace. And, you might have, like you said, like kids distracting you or pets even. So that is a challenge. I mean, just to be honest with you, one thing I'll do is I'll turn on like a 2-hour stream of like a lo-fi playlist, and I will just lock in. As long as that stream is on, I'm on for, 2 hours in PowerPoint or Excel or whatever. So that's one trick I do. It's just kind of like okay, I'm going to set a timer or put on a video, and I know that I'm going to work until that's done. And then at the end of that, having like a little break. That's been really great for me. Making sure to take short breaks and eat or drink a little something, super duper helpful with my productivity. I was noticing for a while, I would just like work for hours and hours on end and forget to go, like literally go down to the kitchen and have a little snack or something. And so by the end of like the workday, I was just like exhausted, too hungry to cook, just ordering, takeout. So that's one thing I would say be careful of, is like it's really easy to, especially when you're working in isolation, overwork yourself and not even realize that you're doing it, because you're like, oh well, this is, I'm doing it for my business, so I'm profiting from it. So it's not like I just worked a 10-hour shift for some guy and, it's a little bit different, but there's some nuance to it. What do you do, Maynard? Like because you said you've got kids. Is it hard for you to, or do they know like, okay, dad's in the office, don't knock on the door?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. First and foremost, I love what you said as well about simple things like eating and drinking, and I have ADHD, so I consider it a superpower now that I'm a little bit older and I've learned how to harness it as opposed to it being a detriment to me, right? And getting into hyper focus, which is really great for productivity, and knowing that I need to have things like this, like podcasts and uh, scheduling things with the clients, or with just regular talks and schmoozes, where it allows me to kind of come out of that space and enter different things. And that's why, this has been like one of the best things right here, like my big old Stanley, right? Like, not the tumbler, it's like the whatever, the 94-ounce big thing. Because if it weren't for this thing, I'm not going to go downstairs and drink a bunch of water.
Right.
I have to have this next to me. Like, I fill it up and I drink it. I'm sitting here, and little by little, it somehow gets drinking every day, right? So, these are the kind of things, and for sure, I think in terms of working from home, I have a 2 and almost a 3-year-old son, which I love him, he loves me, and all we want to do is hang out with each other, right? And so it's not like he's like, oh yeah, Tati's in the office. He's just like gonna barge. He's gonna like sneak in. So we have to have things like having a gate at the top of the stairs. Whatever. And he is pretty good actually, even for being a toddler, to know like, okay, cool, like whatever. I'm not just gonna barge in. But if he barges in, it is what it is. I think there's obviously a certain level of professionalism, and also a certain level of understanding that we're all kind of um, in different spaces, different settings, and if it's just something that is becoming like, we have employees, and I definitely um, ask that everybody have their own kind of space, right? If they're working from home, that's great, but it can't be in the family room, and where it's like there's no distinction between when it's dad time and when it's work time. It's like help me with my math problem, but there's things to do, right? And these are, like I said, the things that I expect of myself as well, and that we have here kind of in place. So it definitely is a double-edged sword where you think, oh, great, I have freedom, and instead of having to order takeout I'm here in the office and whatever, and I can just go downstairs and get stuff, right? But like you said, I have to remind myself. Or my wife has she's like, hey, don't forget to eat, and that kind of fun stuff. So I think definitely having an amazing partner definitely adds to it as well, right? Where we kind of we always talking about rowing together, right? And rowing the same direction and realigning, and also kind of have what we call GPS meetings. And we have a motto, right? If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So, and that's not in everybody's cards all the time, and I've been an entrepreneur for a lot longer than I've been with her, So it's definitely, as you mentioned, uh, entrepreneurship is very fluid, and it changes. It changes from day to day. It changes from business to business, from client to client, and where we are in our life, right? So definitely, the way that it looked for me 10 years ago is not the way it looks for me today. As with you, right? I think it's great. Being a younger person. I'm also a younger person. I consider myself younger. I'm going to turn 39 in a couple days here, and I consider that young because I've been doing this since I was 24 years old. Yeah, I've actually been an entrepreneur since I was 6, 7 years old, right? So it's just been something that I've been, always selling something, always doing something, always having a little thing that I'm working on, and uh, going in that regard since I was a little kid. So yeah, I love that that's kind of one of the things, I guess, being in that place, kind of uh, younger in a certain sense, but seeing kind of the changing wave, and maybe having mentors that maybe introduce you and coach you in a certain way. I know that just even sports coaching's changed a lot. And as we were talking about, entrepreneurialism is changing. It's always changed. How do you think that it's kind of changed as well to maybe even 10 years ago, or maybe how some of your mentors or coaches are? And how do you see that trend going aside from the remote and technology, kind of how the workspace has kind of changed, in terms of expectations, boundaries, a lot of great stuff come along with it, and maybe some stuff where you see employers kind of like complaining, like, "Oh my gosh, everybody's," and
Yeah.
kind of different from what our parents kind of had to deal with. And how do you see that kind of changing for us self starters and people who really got to be on the ball? How do you think that it's changed, or it's going to continue to change?
Well, I think right now we're kind of on the precipice of a really big shift in our society, at least, in the US for us. I would say we're kind of on the precipice of a really big shift in terms of, after COVID, a lot of people were working remotely and that became much more common. And there became like a lot more acceptance for a diverse type of workforce. So people working from home, maybe because they're parents, but maybe because of a disability or something like that. Like you don't know. And then there's some people who prefer to work in office. So I think one really great thing that's come out of it is like more acceptance of different work lifestyles, if that
Mhm.
makes sense. But I do think it will kind of continue to evolve, especially with AI. Like we kind of mentioned this a little bit and teased it earlier, but ChatGPT operator is doing some really cool things. There are some really interesting tools being introduced into our society right now. Now, with that, there is kind of like that adoption curve of, are you going to be an early adopter? Are you already, using AI right now? Are you a little bit more of a laggard and you wait to listen to which is the best AI that everybody kind of picks up using? And, you hear Chat GPT enough, you start, trying it out and playing with it a little bit. So it depends on where you sit on that kind of adoption curve because there are different people. For me, I think I'm somewhere in between being an early adopter and kind of like a late joiner because I do kind of like to listen and hear like, okay, Why are people ditching Perplexity for ChatGPT or vice
Mhm.
versa?
Mhm.
And there's so many tools right now, the market is a little bit saturated. We kind of are seeing that happening with like streaming right now. Like the market is so saturated. It used to just be Netflix.
Yeah.
And then kind of Hulu came along and then Disney. And now there's like literally a channel for everything. I don't know if when this is going to air, but I will just kind of date it a little bit. The Super Bowl was yesterday. I watched it on Tubi.
Yeah.
Never had used it before, but heard about that's where the Super Bowl is going to be. And now I'm looking at movies on Tubi for later tonight. So there is kind of this boom of whenever there's a new technology, whether it's streaming or AI, there is like a renaissance almost of like, boom, here's a million different tools. Let's see which ones people gravitate towards
Yeah.
and use. And for a long time, that was Netflix because there weren't ads. But now that Netflix has kind of started to introduce ads, like Hulu, now there's, people like Tubi who are like, okay, we can do ads. Well, then you don't even need to pay for a subscription. It's free. So people are going to see utility in that and maybe use Tubi more than Netflix and take a little bit of revenue away from Netflix, which might make Netflix have to change something. Maybe, Tubi is going to be the new big dog or like market leader versus Netflix, which has been, I would say on the throne ever since they like dethroned Blockbuster from way
Yeah.
back when. Hopefully people listening to this podcast are old enough to remember Blockbuster. So that's kind of like the example that I would point to for AI is pretty soon, pretty soon right now, there are going to be so many AI tools that the market is saturated, but the ones that are going to stick around are the ones that people adopt because of their utility. Which is
Yep.
why going back to ChatGPT, I think their new operator function is really cool. For anybody listening who doesn't know, if you have a pro subscription for ChatGPT, which I think is like $20 a month, which is pretty affordable for an AI that can do some really crazy stuff. But, might not be affordable for everybody. They do still have their free version. But if you do the paid version, there's a different tool or feature on ChatGPT called ChatGPT Operator, which essentially, can utilize a virtual workspace or like a virtual machine, a virtual computer. It doesn't have to exist in real life. And they can do essentially everything that a human using a computer could do. That's supposed to be ChatGPT's operator. As Maynard and I were talking about, though, there are some bugs in the system, some kinks you got to kind of work through. It's still kind of in beta and testing. So the first users are going to be the ones who kind of test out the bugs for like the rest of us late adopters. But pretty soon people are going to gravitate towards en masse the AI tool that they feel has the most utility. And the other ones are going to kind of drop away or become acquired by different larger AIs. So we're really going to get to see, I would say, over the next 2 to 3 years, kind of like the death of a lot of smaller AIs and the rise of some of these bigger players. And I think that's why Google and Apple have been really like pushing their AI features because they know at the end of the day for users like me, it's about utility and the value of a tool versus, how they advertise it. But
Yeah.
I'd be interested to know your thoughts.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think you made so many good points there, like in terms of the streaming wars and where we were. Where I totally remember Blockbuster and going on a Friday night, and we're spending some time there, and that was like fun part, right? Like oh, I'm gonna have a sleepover at a friend's house, and we're gonna go and pick out a couple movies I'm gonna watch, and definitely was a part of the experience, and I think the CEO overvalued that, right? That people would never. What do you mean? This is like what people like to do. Do you think they're just gonna like order their thing to their house? And that's what it was at the time, right? You get the DVDs and the slips taken to your house, and you have to wait a day or two, and then you send it back, and then to the streaming, right? And at the beginning of the Netflix, it was you could get everything on there, right? That was the main place where everything was, and little by little, stuff starts coming off with licensing, and oh, we're gonna start on our own, we're gonna go on here, and there's always trends, and there are always races to be part of that trend, and then it creates this artificial, what people say is like a bubble, and the bubble's gonna pop, And once again, that bubble in and of itself, or the bubble popping, is a lot of times overvalued. For instance, with with crypto, right? People say, "Oh, it's a bubble, it's gonna pop," and it may be that some of the the meme coins or all these kind of things, those kind of go away, and the ones that add the most utility end up being moving to the top. And the same thing with streaming, where I think everybody and their mother having their own streaming service is not conducive right now. It's like everybody's, you move away from cable and then you end up paying as much for the streaming service as you were for cable. And that's not sustainable either. I think ultimately what we're seeing here, even with Disney, right? The Disney just introduced an ad on to their highest tier, right? Where they're like, like they just, there's no long term commitment, but that also means that the streaming services can just change their prices and change their tiers at will, and that's what we've kind of seen as well, right? Where Hulu's always playing with their stuff, Max always playing with their stuff, Netflix changing their prices and everything until to the why is that happening? Because they're finding that's not sustainable, right? And their runway is kind of slowing down, they're running out, and so little by little you get people leaving the space, and that's kind of capitalism, right? When it's done in a proper way, where you have a lot of people who listen, open market, hopefully, and then people come and you get a lot of failures. You got a lot of people coming in there and they stick around for a while. I was in cannabis for a while, and you saw the same thing there. And there's a big movement, and it seems saturated, and then there's a market correction, and I think as well, like I said, that correction is overvalued, and because people think, well, the technology is going to go away too, right? Like the .com, people always talk about the .com era, and how that bubble popped. Well, it did, but it also didn't, because we're still using .com websites, right? So it just, you overvalued at that time, and then that's what made it happen. So I think that's kind of where we see kind of business always shifting, and now just like music tastes shifting very quickly, and trends and memes and things like that shifting very quickly due to our kind of never-ending consumption that we've kind of been programmed to, and we're kind of playing into. I think the same thing is going to happen in business, where you see a lot of people just kind of jumping from one thing to another thing, and that's kind of why, even with my ADHD, I have to I've had to train myself to not have what many people call shiny object syndrome, where it's like, what's the next best thing? And you don't want to miss these big trends and these big bubbles. At the same time, how many of them end up not being anything? And in the meantime, sticking to your guns and sticking to your values, I think for the most part plays out better in the long term for people who really want to stick around for the long term, instead of just looking for a quick buck here and there. So that's kind of my
And
two cents on that.
in terms of companies too, I will say, um, like Blockbuster knew. Like it wasn't like, oh, Netflix, we'd never heard of this before. Now we're declaring bankruptcy. Like people tried to warn them, your business model is outdated. You need to innovate. You need to get with the times. People don't want to spend their Friday nights looking for movies at your store. They'd rather scroll around on their couch using their remote, flipping through channels like we've done since the dawn of television. So I would say for all businesses that they should really keep their ear to the ground and never stop innovating. Because if you do, like, that's when you're going to lose your momentum and like your, competitive edge. So I would say for Netflix and all the other streaming platforms right now is like they need to be rethinking their model. If they're going to, switch over to this advertised structure, think about how that's going to affect your end consumer beyond just your revenue. And think about how they want to consume. And that's why Netflix became popular in the first place. It's because back in the day with Netflix, like you said, they would mail you a DVD, which, is not as convenient as what their current offering is now, but they continued to innovate. Even though they were, Blockbuster filed bankruptcy, Netflix continued to innovate, and that's why they were kind of that, category or market leader for so long. And now we're kind of like watching them kind of fumble the ball a little bit, to bring it back to some Super Bowl terms.
Yeah, I mean, and with football, right? They just hosted their a football game this year on Netflix, and you had to like, I mean, I signed up for that game. I forget who was playing, right? But I signed up. But another thing that I signed up for, and I hadn't had Netflix in so long, and whatever. And this was a big thing was that they brought on wrestling WWE, right? So now this
Yeah.
was like a big thing where WWE had been on USA on cable forever, and now they made the jump and signed some $5 billion contract or something like this over the next few years or whatever. I forget the exact terms, but this is like that way of innovating, right? And going from the streaming to live TV and bringing that and offering that to people around the world, right? So I think part of entrepreneurship is overcoming struggles and, like you said, innovating. And I guess in terms of Palfrey Consulting, what is kind of like your biggest challenge that you're facing right now in terms of taking it to the next level, or making more people aware of it, or there's so many businesses that are very successful and even in pin plateau. So kind of where's the biggest challenge you're now facing in terms of reaching that next level you want to reach, and kind of what's the next step in that regard?
That's such a difficult question to answer because being an entrepreneur is kind of like problem whack-a-mole. As soon as I feel like I've got one thing, hammered down, another problem pops up. So it's hard to pinpoint my biggest problem because there's a few.
Def-
But I would say just and probably a lot of entrepreneurs can relate to this, but it is, I think they call it like a feast and famine cycle of oh, I have too much work. Oh, I don't have enough work. Or, oh, I need more clients. Oh, I'm overwhelmed with the amount of clients I
yeah.
have. It's usually one or the other and not somewhere in between. So that's one thing that's really difficult. And like as you said, the fact that working from home is becoming more accessible, entrepreneurialism is becoming more accessible, more people are doing it. So there's, a lot of competition in a saturated market. So I would say differentiation is something that's difficult. I wouldn't necessarily say it's a problem, but it's something that everybody kind of has to do. Like, how do you differentiate yourself from the competition? How does Netflix differentiate itself from Hulu? Those kinds of questions. I am approaching them slowly. I don't have all the answers. But I think that the path I'm on is one I'm really excited and looking forward to. So I'm just taking it slow and kind of enjoying the ride. And honestly, I feel like every day, as long as I'm learning something, it's a success. So, even if I went bankrupt tomorrow, which I'm not going to, um, you know, I said this earlier, but the worst case scenario is I have to go back to W-2 work, instead of, being an entrepreneur, or I would just probably continue my entrepreneurialism after hours, my 5 to 9 after my 9 to 5.
Yeah.
But yeah, if that's the worst that can happen, what is there to be afraid of? My mom always says this thing that I just love her saying. She says, um, leap and the safety net will appear. So don't wait until you have, this much in savings, or wait until you think the moment is right to start doing this. Work on it bit by bit. Work on it, for 30 minutes after your 9 to 5 every day if you don't feel like it's time to make the full leap. But if you are thinking about making the full leap, what is there holding you back other than fear, really? So I would say one of the biggest problems for an entrepreneur, especially somebody who, works in isolation. I do work alone from my home. I don't have really a ton of friends in the entrepreneur space, but Maynard's helping me change that. The biggest thing I would say is just getting over your own fear and doing it anyways. And do it if you're afraid. It's okay to be afraid, but don't let it hold you back. So yeah, just continuing to grow and not be afraid of the unknown, because it's really not as scary as you think. And there's that old saying of the devil you know is better than the devil you don't know. But is it really? Is it really, or are you just comfortable with the devil you've known for a while? You don't know.
Yeah.
It's kind of I don't want to break up with my boyfriend because what if I never find somebody as good as him? But my boyfriend, makes me pay for all the dinners and never does any housework and blah, blah, blah. But the devil you don't know is even worse. It's like a fear tactic. So I would just say, don't let fear be your motivator. It's okay to be afraid, but it can't hold you back, and don't let it, because then you're giving it more power than it should have over you. So I would say the biggest thing, like being an entrepreneur, that is like, the hardest thing to deal with is getting out of your own way. I don't know if you could agree with that, but for me, getting out of my own way and just like believe in yourself, even if other people don't, like they're not always going to be able to see the things that you see and know the things that you know and feel the way you feel or accomplish the things that you can accomplish.
Yeah,
So, yeah, I guess that's my advice for entrepreneurs.
yeah, yeah, and as well as to agree with so much of what you said there, and not only is it like, well, if this doesn't work out, I can go back to do something else. It's like this most likely this iteration. It's not that it won't work out, but it's not going to look the same later on, right? Like I
Right.
in the digital version of my entrepreneurship journey, which has been over a decade, right? It's had a couple iterations already, right? And definitely over the course of, as I mentioned, been doing something entrepreneur oriented since the time I was 6 or 7. In the last 30 plus years, it's definitely looks completely different, right? And how that's changed. And just once again, right, being, I think the failures, quote unquote failures, that aren't really failures, right? But learning lessons, and it's like so cliche, but I think that that's like kind of the main thing of being entrepreneurs, having not only tough skin but high pain tolerance while still being able to adapt and uh, you know uh, adjust and integrate those lessons as well. Now,
You make
how can
you make a great you make a great point though. Sorry to interrupt.
no, that was
I
great.
do want to just I want to draw attention to the fact that failure isn't the end. Like, the most successful person you can think of has failed a few dozen times getting there. Like, if the worst thing that can happen in your business is your business going bankrupt, I'd say look at the president of the United States. He had a few bankruptcies before he became president. Or, like look at Oprah Winfrey or J.K. Rowling. I'm pretty sure she went to like 40 different publishers before she found someone who would publish Harry Potter. And that IP has gone on to make billions of dollars, I'm pretty sure.
At
Like,
least
it's inherent. Failure is a part of the process. Don't let the fear of failure hold you back, because failure is just an opportunity to start again. And, the first thing, like Maynard said, the first thing you make isn't going to be as good as it's going to be when you're done with it. Whenever I make, PowerPoint or an Excel spreadsheet or fill in the blank, the first draft is usually a little shitty, but you should see my 40th draft. It starts to come together. So yeah, I would just kind of piggyback off what you said and accept failure, embrace failure. It's going to happen. It's semi inevitable. To err is human. I forget who said that quote, but don't let the fear of failure hold you back, because it's just a stepping stone on the path.
that's exactly right. No, that's great. And yeah, I guess as we start to wind down, let our listeners know how they can learn more about Powerfree Consulting, get in touch with you, and seek out you and your services.
Absolutely. So, Palfrey Consulting, like I'm your pal, Palfrey. It's a type of horse that, I think royal people like Cleopatra used to ride. And the reason I named my company that is because, like, when I was a little kid and, you would always like wish on an eyelash or like throw a penny in a fountain, I would always wish for a pony just because I wanted to see, like, chances of me getting a pony aren't great. So if I get a pony, I'm going to know this stuff is real. But I would always wish for a pony. And eventually when I, created my own business, I was like, I'm going to give myself a pony. So that's my logo. It's a little horse. It
Uh,
doesn't relate to anything I do. I don't work with horses, but, never say never. Um, but if you're interested in, having a conversation like this with me, some business consulting, or if you just need help with like a logo, making a PowerPoint look good, I can do that type of thing too. Digital marketing is kind of my area of expertise. But yeah, that's how to find me. The easiest way is just, you can also email me, Bailey@palfreeconsulting.com, or you can check out my website. It's always growing and changing. Like I said, my first version's not going to be as good as my next, but we'll keep growing. And yeah, I'm super open to having conversations with people like this. If you guys think you might be interested in entrepreneurialism, but you just don't know where to start and you don't have any entrepreneurs in your context, feel free to reach out to me. I'd love just to have, a conversation like this. I think it's great the more that you can, of course, always network in your business, but like also build community of like, there's people that I know in my business and professional network that I've never worked with, that I've never had the pleasure of working with. We just chatted at, some conference, or I've, appeared on their podcast briefly. There's a lot of opportunity to find community around you. And just because you're kind of isolated and working remotely doesn't mean you have to work alone. So yeah. And then just because I know we're closing out, I just want to give a shout out. Um, because it can look easy from the outside being like an entrepreneur and just being like, oh yeah, I've had all these successes, but I want to shout out my family. Like, shout out to my mom and dad for sticking together through 30 years of what seemed like a little bit of rough patches here and there. Like, thank you for that support. I don't think I could have done it without that. Or my boyfriend, who is amazing at, you know, making dinners sometimes, or doing extra loads of laundry when they need to get done. And shout out to Maynard's partner, who's probably keeping his kids quiet right now.
Couple times,
It,
couple times, they're sleeping now, but yeah, a couple times I heard one of them sneaking out, the other one sneaking out, so.
But it does. It takes a village. So build yourself a village, connect to people. Just because, one friendship or one mentorship doesn't work out doesn't mean it's the end. It's just the beginning.
Very good, very good. And last thing, I always got to slip it in there. You mentioned something about success earlier, and I want to follow up with that at the time, but I want to also give you the uh, ability to plug yourself and everything. But tell me about your definition of success. What does success look like for you, whether professionally, spiritually, personally, otherwise?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking it. Um, Tyler, the Creator, this is so random. Tyler, the Creator, has a wonderful song called Heaven to Me.
I
And
thought
it's
you were gonna
all
say
about like,
Sticky. He's got a good song.
that's a good one too.
Yeah,
That's a
definitely, definitely.
But no, this one is called Heaven to Me. And he says, like, heaven to me is waking up when I'm finished with my sleep and not having a boss to report back to. And he goes on and on about it. And those are some of the things I would point back to, like wealth and success looks like to me being able to kind of be the boss of my own life and set my own schedule. And when I have somebody I'm working with who I fundamentally disagree with or dislike, I can choose to stop working with them. I don't have to keep working with them just because I'm, you know, slave to some job, or because somebody else says, well, this is our most important client. You have to. It's really nice to have that walk away power. That's something that I think Chapel Rowan mentioned recently in a Grammys interview with Gail. She mentioned that she now has the power to walk away. She has walk away power. When her label does something that she doesn't agree with, or somebody on the red carpet says something rude to her or calls her something, derogatory, she has the power to walk away. She also has the power to speak up and say something. So, yeah, I would say that's what success looks like to me. It looks a lot like hard work, but it also looks like having walk away power and having the ability to work on my terms. So I'm not going to work with somebody who's, say out there in the world creating content that I fundamentally disagree with. And that's really, really liberating. So I would say my success looks a lot like liberation. And hopefully at the end of it, like someday, if I, ever make millions of dollars, what would that look like? It would probably look pretty similar to how I'm living now. I try not to let like lifestyle creep, you know, damage my bank account. So I live a very modest life, and I think I would continue to regardless of how much I had in my bank account. But I would love to be able to do more for my community of like donating money to different charities, or like there's so many things like the wildfires that popped up in LA. I'd love to be able to donate to causes like that frequently and like consistently. So if I did have millions of dollars, I think, you wouldn't like see me rolling around in a G-Wagon with a Rolex. You would probably be like, Bailey's doing a lot of work in soup kitchens. Bailey's making a lot of weird donations to charities I'd never heard of before now, but I don't think it would look too different from how I'm living right now. I don't think I would, become successful and turn into a different person. But, who knows? I'm really excited to meet the future version of myself that, I will become. So, yeah,
Amazing.
looking forward to
And
it.
yeah, I think that that's super powerful. I think that's one of the things that I love about what I do, and is having that walkaway power, like you said. And a lot of times when I'm talking to maybe a prospect, maybe they think I'm trying to sell them or whatever, and it's really not. It's the opposite. I'm trying to see if it's somebody that I want to work with long term. They gotta kind of sell themselves, and I'm grateful for that. That the people that I get to work with, that I get to bring on as clients, are people that I really like, that I enjoy the conversations, and get to work with people that I would want to hang out with in real life, and not just somebody that oh well, I better not screw this one up because this is my bread and butter or whatever else. So
Right.
definitely a great thing there, and that also carries into being able to be authentically myself and create the content that I want to do. I don't have to be controversial on purpose. That's definitely not don't have to be something where you're just whatever, trying to piss people off on purpose or anything like that. Definitely not. But I get to be Maynard everywhere, and that means I don't have to put on a front or be anybody else at any time. And that is super liberating. So I really appreciate that with you in terms of that success, and wishing you so much success and everything that you're doing to continue to grow and to continue to be in that place where you more soup kitchens and more donations and giving back, and all those good things as well. So Bailey, everybody check out Bailey here for Palfrey Consulting. Bailey Price. I'm sorry, Bailey Pace. I apologize. And
Fine.
and yeah, thank you everybody as well, wherever you are, for making us a part of your day. I appreciate you. And Bailey, thank you for your time, and all the best to you this year and beyond.
Thanks. You too.
Thank